Blood was seeping between her toes with every step. Catherine had been walking for 3 days through the scorched Wyoming desert after outlaws murdered everyone on her stagecoach and left her for dead. Her body was giving up. The darkness was closing in. Then she heard thundering hooves and felt strong arms lift her from the ground. She had no idea that the rugged cowboy who just saved her life was about to change everything she ever believed about love. This story proves that sometimes your darkest moment is the doorway to your greatest blessing. And that true love doesn't arrive in a ballroom. Sometimes it shows up on horseback, covered in trail dust, with gentle hands that know how to heal. If you believe love can bloom in the harshest places, drop a heart below. Subscribe and stay until the end. Catherine's journey is about to take you somewhere unforgettable. Blood was seeping between Catherine Anderson's toes, and every single step she took across that scorched Wyoming flatland was pure agony. She left a trail of red marks in the dust behind her. It was 1875, and she'd been hoofing it for 3 whole days since some low-down outlaws took her horse and all her supplies, leaving her for dead way out west of Rollins. That mean old summer sun just hammered down on Catherine's head. Her once pretty blue dress was ripped all to heck and caked with dirt, and her blonde hair was a tangled mess around her sunburned face. She was just trying to visit her sick aunt in Colorado when bandits hit the stagecoach, killing the driver and everybody else. Catherine was the only one who got away, running into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now, after nearly a full day with no water, her lips were cracked and bleeding almost as bad as her feet. The leather on her boots gave out days ago, and the rocky ground had torn the bottoms of her feet to shreds. But still, Catherine made herself keep going. She was only 22 years old and just wasn't ready to cash in her chips. Not out here, not right now, not in this awful way. Just a little bit further, she whispered, her voice so quiet you could hardly hear it over the hot wind blowing across the plains. Just get to the top of that next hill. She kept her eyes locked on a small ridge up ahead, praying it would at least be a change from the endless, flat nothingness. Maybe on the other side she'd find water, or shelter, or any sign that people still existed. Catherine grew up in Boston, the daughter of a big-shot shipper, and never wanted for a thing. Her fancy life hadn't prepared her one bit for how cruel the frontier could be. As she got closer to that ridge, little black spots started dancing in front of her eyes. Her knees gave out from under her, and she fell hard on the rough ground, scraping up her palms. The sting of it barely registered with all the other pain she was in. Catherine tried to get up, but her body just wouldn't listen. She rolled onto her side, taking short, desperate little breaths. Well, this is it, she thought as the world started to go fuzzy. This is how I die. That's when the sound of thunder and hooves broke through the fog in her mind. She heard a hoarse nicker, then a man's deep voice, full of concern. Strong arms lifted her right off the ground. The very last thing she knew before everything went black was the feeling of being held tight against a solid chest and the smell of leather and tobacco all around her. When Catherine's eyes opened again, she was laying on a bedroll in a little tent. A lantern was lit close by, making everything glow gold. Somebody had bandaged up her feet and put a cool, wet cloth on her forehead. She tried to sit up, but a dizzy spell pushed her right back down. "Whoa there, easy does it," a low voice said from the tent flap. "You're safe now, but you need to take it easy." Catherine turned her head and saw a man kneeling in the entryway. He was tall and lean, with wide shoulders and skin tanned dark by the sun. The brim of his worn hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could see he had a strong jaw with a few days of whiskers on it. He had on a dusty denim shirt, a leather vest, and old jeans tucked into scuffed-up boots. A gun belt was slung low on his hips. The pistol in its holster made it plain he knew how to handle himself in this tough country. "Who are you?" Catherine managed to ask, her voice just a dry rasp. The man came on into the tent and knelt down beside her. In the better light, she saw his eyes were a shocking blue against his tan skin. He looked to be about 30 years old, with little lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun a time or two. "Folks call me Adam Zane," he said, handing her a canteen. "I found you out on the flats, about half dead. What's a lady like yourself doing all alone out here?" Catherine took a tiny sip of water, closing her eyes as the cool liquid wet her dry throat. "My name is Catherine Anderson," she told him. "I was on my way to Rollins when my stagecoach was attacked. I, I was the only one who made it out. Adam's face got real grim. Sounds like the Blackwell gang. They've been hitting stages between here and Denver for months. How far are we from Rollins? Catherine asked, trying to sit up again. A little slower this time. About 40 miles, Adam answered, putting a hand on her shoulder to steady her. I'm heading that way myself. I've got some horses I've been training for the arm to deliver. We can go together, but not till those feet of yours have a chance to mend. You were bleeding something awful when I found you. Catherine looked down at her bandaged feet, and her cheeks turned pink with embarrassment. I'm so sorry to be a bother. Adam just shook his head. Ain't it no bother? A man can't just leave a lady to die in the wilderness. That's not the way my ma raised me. He got up and walked toward the tent flap. I've got some stew cooking on the fire. You reckon you could eat something? Catherine nodded, suddenly feeling how empty her stomach was. Yes, thank you. I haven't eaten in days. Adam ducked outside and came back in a second with a tin plate full of beans and beef. To Catherine, that simple meal smelled like the finest dinner, and she ate it slow, enjoying every single bite. So what's waiting for you in Rollins? Adam asked, sitting cross-legged on the ground near the tent opening. My uncle, Catherine said between bites. Thomas Anderson. He owns the mercantile there. I was in Denver visiting my aunt when she passed on. I'm all on my own now, and Uncle Thomas said I could come stay with him. Adam nodded his head. I know Thomas. He's a good man. He's going to be worried sick about you. I was supposed to be there 3 days ago, Catherine said, putting her empty plate down. I have never been late for anything in my whole life, and now I'm late to the start of my own new life. She let out a little laugh, but it sounded bitter and even surprised her. Life out here doesn't pay much attention to a person's schedule, Adam said with just a hint of a smile. You learn to bend so you don't break. I'm learning that lesson awfully quick, Catherine admitted. Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Zane. It's Adam, he corrected her. Out here, fancy titles don't mean a whole lot. Now you get some rest. It'll be a few days before you're in any shape to travel. As Adam left the tent, Catherine laid back on the bedroll, and the tiredness washed over her again. Even with everything that had happened, she felt strangely safe with this quiet, capable man. The presence of this quiet, competent stranger was comforting. Her very last thought before she drifted off to sleep was that maybe the West wasn't just the cruel, hard place she'd thought it was. The next morning, Catherine woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Every muscle in her body ached, but her head felt clearer than it had in days. She carefully took the bandages off her feet to see how bad they were. The sight of them made her cringe. The bottoms were raw and blistered, and a few deep cuts had been cleaned and covered with some kind of salve. Plantain poultice, Adam said, ducking his head into the tent with a hot cup of coffee. It's an old Shoshone remedy that works better than anything a doctor carries in his bag. Catherine quickly covered her feet back up, feeling a little awkward about him seeing them bare. It seems to be working, she said, taking the kavina with a grateful nod. Those cuts were deep, Adam said, his face all serious. You're mighty lucky you didn't lose more blood or get a bad infection. It'll be a few days before you can walk on them without tearing those wounds back open. Catherine's spirits fell. I don't want to hold you up on your journey. I'm in no big hurry, Adam answered with a simple shrug of his shoulders. Besides, the horses could use the rest. They had a long haul from my ranch up near South Pass. You're a rancher? Catherine asked, taking a sip of the strong black coffee. Adam nodded. Got a small place. I mostly raise and train horses. I also do a little scouting for the army when they need a hand. He motioned toward the tent flap. You think you can make it outside? Some fresh air might do you some good. Catherine nodded and set her coffee cup down. I can try. Adam offered her his arm, and Catherine took it, letting him help her stand up. The pain shot through her feet right away, making her gasp and grab his arm even tighter. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, she said, talking through clenched teeth. Without saying a word, Adam just bent down and scooped her right up into his arms, carrying her out of the tent like she weighed nothing at all. Catherine was too stunned to even protest. She was suddenly very aware of how strong he was and the way his arms held her, safe against his chest. Mr. Zane, she gasped, this is hardly proper. I told you it's Adam, he answered back, with a little bit of a chuckle in his voice. And out here, proper is whatever keeps you alive and well. He set her down nice and easy on a blanket he'd spread out near the campfire, where a small pot of beans was bubbling away. His camp was tucked into a little canyon that gave them good shelter from the wind. A clear stream trickled nearby, and Adam's two horses, a solid bay gelding and a pretty dapple-gray mare, were tied up in a shady spot with plenty of grass. "It's beautiful here," Catherine said, taking in the red rock walls of the canyon and the slice of blue sky way up above. After so many days out on the open plains, this sheltered little spot felt like heaven. "It's one of my favorite places to camp," Adam agreed, pouring her another cup of coffee. "Good water, good shelter, and not too many folks know about it." And over the next couple of days, they settled into a comfortable routine. Every morning and evening, Adam would carry Catherine outside, leaving her sitting comfortably, while he took care of the horses, hunted for supper, or went to check his traps. When the sun was at its highest, they both found their way into the shade. Catherine went to the tent, and Adam found a spot under a big rock overhang where he'd mend his tack or carve little wooden animals with his pocket knife. Every single evening, Adam would change the bandages on Catherine's feet. His big, rough hands were surprisingly gentle. Chow, as he put on fresh salve and wrapped them up clean. Catherine slowly got over feeling embarrassed about him tending to her, finding herself captivated by how quietly and skillfully he worked. On the third hour, after Adam unwrapped her feet, he gave a satisfied nod. "They're healing up just fine, boss," he said. "You might even be able to walk a little ways tomorrow." "Oh, thank goodness," Catherine said, and she truly meant it. "I am going absolutely stir-crazy just sitting here day after day." A rare smile spread across Adam's weathered face, making him look years younger. City folk always seem to have a hard time sitting still. Out here, learning to have patience, it is just as important as learning how to shoot. "Can you teach me?" Catherine asked all of a sudden. Adam looked up, and you could see the surprise plain in his blue eyes. "Teach you what? Patience or shooting?" "Both," Catherine answered, surprising even herself with her own words. "If I am going to make a life out here, I ought to learn how to survive. Should I not?" Adam thought on this for a second, then gave a slow nod. "Reckon that's true enough. We can get started tomorrow, if your feet feel up to it." The next morning, Catherine's feet were still sore, but the sharpest part of the pain was gone. With Adam's arm to lean on, she was able to take a few steps all by herself before it started to hurt too much. "That's progress," Adam said, his voice full of approval. "Another day or two and you'll be set to ride." "Ride," Catherine said the word back, looking at the horses with a good bit of fear. "I have only ever ridden in a carriage or on a very tame mare in the park back home." "Can't get to Rollins without riding," Adam pointed out. "Unless you'd rather I carry you the whole 40 miles. The thought of being carried in Adam's strong arms for that long brought a deep blush to Catherine's cheeks. "I suppose I will have to learn then," she said, trying her best to sound much braver than she felt. The corner of Adam's mouth twitched in what could have passed for a smile. "Daisy over there is as gentle as they come," he said, tipping his head toward the dappled gray mare. "She'll take real good care of you." After they had breakfast, Adam made good on his promise to start Catherine's lessons in surviving the frontier. He took out his revolver, a Colt Peacemaker with worn wooden grips, and patiently walked her through how to load it, take aim, and fire. The very first time Catherine pulled the trigger, the kickback nearly sent her tumbling off the crate she was sitting on, and the bullet missed the tin can Adam had set up on a rock 20 feet away by a mile. "Not half bad for a first try," Adam said, his voice even, though Catherine swore she saw a little bit of amusement twinkling in his eyes. "This is harder than it appears," Catherine said, defending herself while she rubbed her wrist. "Everything out here is," Adam answered. He moved to stand right behind her, fixing her hold on the pistol. "Thumb goes here, finger just rests on the trigger. Breathe out slow as you squeeze." Catherine was keenly aware of how close he was, of his chest pressing for a moment against her back as he leaned over to fix her hands. His breath was a warm tickle against her ear, and she suddenly found it very hard to focus on what he was saying. "Try it again," he said, taking a step back. Catherine drew in a deep breath, aimed just like he showed her, and fired. This time the can jumped right off the rock. "I did it!" she cried out, spinning around to face Adam with a grin of pure happiness. "That you did," he said, and there was something in the way he looked at her, a certain warmth and respect, that made Catherine's heart pick up its pace. The rest of the afternoon was filled with more lessons just like that. Adam showed her how to build a proper fire, which plants were safe to eat, and how to read a compass. Catherine soaked it all up like a sponge, surprised by how much she enjoyed learning all these practical things. As they sat by the fire that evening, sharing a rabbit Adam had caught, Catherine found herself watching the man who had saved her. In the dancing firelight, his face was a map of hard lines and soft shadows, handsome in a rugged sort of way that was a world apart from the polished men she knew from Boston society. "Why did you decide to become a rancher?" she asked, breaking the comfortable quiet that had settled over them. Adam poked at the fire with a stick, making sparks fly up into the night sky. "Came west after the war," he finally said. "Didn't have much of anything waiting for me back east, and I'd seen enough killing to last a man a lifetime. Worked as a scout for a spell, saved up enough to buy myself a little piece of land. Turns out I got a knack with horses," he said with a shrug. "It's a good life, it's quiet, and it's free." "You were in the war?" Catherine asked in a soft voice. Adam nodded, his face closing up a little. "Union cavalry, 4 years of hell." Catherine paused, then asked, "Do you have any family somewhere?" "Lost my folks when I was just a boy. Had a brother, but he never came back from Gettysburg." Adam's voice was plain and simple, but Catherine could feel the old hurt hiding just beneath his words. "I am so sorry," she said, immediately wishing she had not brought it up. Adam just shrugged his shoulders again. "That was a long time ago. What about you?" "Just my uncle in Rollins." "My parents passed away in a fire 5 years ago," Catherine said, feeling that old familiar ache rise up in her. "My aunt took me in, but she was already sick by then. When she passed on, Uncle Thomas was the only family I had left in the world. I have never even met the man. He came out west long before I was born, but he wrote such kind letters after my aunt died." "Thomas is a good man," Adam said again, like before. "He'll see you're taken care of." "I just hope I can be of some use to him," Catherine said. "I do not want to be a burden." "You're a whole lot tougher than you look," Adam noted. "You walked for 3 days on bleeding feet. Most city folk would have just laid down and died on the first day." Coming from a man like Adam, that felt like the highest compliment. Catherine smiled, and a strange warmth bloomed in her chest. "Thank you for everything." Adam's eyes locked with hers across the crackling fire, and for a good long moment, neither one of them said a word. Then he cleared his throat and got to his feet. "We ought to get some sleep. If your feet keep getting better, we can try putting you up on Daisy tomorrow." The next day broke clear and cool, a nice change from the blistering heat of the days before. Catherine's feet felt a world better, and she could walk short ways without needing to lean on Adam. Right after breakfast, Adam declared it was time for her very first riding lesson. "I am not sure I am ready for this," Catherine said, a nervous flutter in her stomach as Adam led Daisy over to her. "No time like the present," Adam answered, checking the saddle. "This old girl has carried wounded men off of battlefields. I promise she won't let you fall." Catherine walked up to the mare slowly, putting out a hand to stroke her soft nose. Daisy huffed a gentle breath into her palm. "She is beautiful," Catherine whispered. "That she is," Adam agreed. "Now put your good foot in the stirrup, and I'll give you a boost up." With Adam's steady hands on her waist, Catherine somehow managed to swing herself up into the saddle. The world looked awfully far down from up there, and she grabbed onto the saddle horn for dear life. "Just relax," Adam told her, keeping a reassuring hand on her leg. "Horses can feel it when you're scared. You got to let her know you trust her." Catherine made herself loosen her tight muscles and took a deep breath. "That's better," Adam said. "Now sit up tall, heels down." That's it. For the next hour, Adam led Daisy in slow circles around the little canyon, teaching Catherine the simple basics of how to ride. By the time the lesson was over, Catherine's face was flushed with a mix of excitement and a brand new feeling of confidence. "I think I am actually getting the hang of this," she announced as Adam helped her down. "You're a natural," Adam said, and Catherine was surprised to hear real admiration in his voice. "We'll do some more tomorrow, and if that goes well, we can head out for Rollins the day after." Catherine felt a strange little twinge when he said that. As much as she wanted to get to the safety of Rollins and finally meet her uncle, the idea of this time with Adam coming to an end filled her with a surprising kind of regret. That evening, as the fire crackled and spit, the words finally started to come easy between them. Adam spun yarns about his time out west, telling her of blinding blizzards and wild stampedes. He spoke of run-ins with bears and mountain lions, and of the raw, dangerous beauty of the frontier. In return, Catherine painted pictures of Boston with her words, describing grand theaters and gatherings of book lovers. She told him about how the seasons changed over the city common and the endless energy of life there. "Sounds mighty crowded," Adam remarked after she described the bustling Boston streets. Catherine let out a laugh. "I reckon it is compared to all this." She motioned toward the enormous wilderness that surrounded them. "But there's a thrill to it too, a feeling that anything can happen, that you are a small part of something much bigger than yourself." "I get that same feeling whenever I look up at those mountains," Adam said, his eyes drifting to the peaks outlined against the sky full of stars. "Makes a man feel small, but in a good way, like your own troubles do not amount to a hill of beans in the grand scheme of things." Catherine watched his face in the firelight, taken aback by the simple wisdom in his words. Back in Boston, she had known well-educated and cultured men, men who could recite Shakespeare and debate politics. They were men who dressed in fine suits and moved with an easy grace across polished ballroom floors. But not a single one of them had this man's self-reliance, his hard-earned knowledge, or his fundamental goodness. "What is it?" Adam asked, noticing her stare. "Oh, nothing," Catherine said, quickly looking away. "I was just wondering how different my life might have been if I had come out west sooner." "Different does not always mean better," Adam said. "Life out here is tough, especially for a woman. There is no shame in preferring comfort and civilization." "But there's a certain freedom here, too, is there not?" Catherine pressed on. "A chance to be known for what you can do, not for who your family is or how much money you have." Adam thought on that for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "I suppose that is true enough. Out here, a person is judged by their deeds, not by their name or the clothes on their back." He looked at her with curiosity. "Are you thinking of staying out west then? Not heading back east after visiting your uncle?" "I do not know," Catherine confessed. "I do not have much to return to. My aunt's house is being sold to cover her debts, and I have no other family there. I figured I would stay with Uncle Thomas for a bit, but after that," she shrugged her shoulders, "I have not made any plans." "Well, Adam said, getting to his feet and stretching, "you have got time to figure things out. For now, we ought to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day if we are getting ready to leave." As Catherine lay on her bedroll that night, she could not stop thinking about Adam. She thought of his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, and the rare smile that completely changed his serious face. In the short time she had known him, he had become more than her rescuer. He was becoming someone whose good opinion she cared about, someone whose company she knew she would sorely miss when they went their separate ways. "It is just gratitude," she told herself, trying to be firm. "He saved my life. It is only natural to feel a connection to him." But as she drifted into sleep, Catherine had to wonder if what she was feeling was something a lot more complicated than simple gratitude. The next day was every bit as busy as he had promised. Adam announced that Catherine's feet were healed enough for travel, and they spent the entire morning getting ready. Catherine had her second riding lesson, this time learning how to steer Daisy with the reins and keep her balance at a walk and a trot. By noon, she was guiding the mare around the canyon with growing confidence. "You are a quick study," Adam said with approval as he helped her down from the saddle. "We will make a cowgirl out of you yet." Catherine laughed. "I do not know about that, but I think I can make it to Rollins without falling off." "That is the spirit," Adam said, his hand resting at her waist just a moment longer than it needed to. They packed their supplies together, with Adam carefully explaining the purpose of every single item. As they worked, Catherine listened intently, determined to remember every lesson he taught her. "Water is your most valuable possession out here," Adam said, filling their canteens from the stream. "Never pass by a source of water without filling up. You never know when you will find the next one." "What about food?" Catherine asked. "A person can go for weeks without food if they have to," Adam answered, "but only a few days without water. That being said, these are good to have." He showed her a small leather pouch filled with jerky and another with dried corn. They are light, do not spoil, and will give you energy when you need it most. By the late afternoon, everything was packed and ready for their departure the next morning. Adam decided they should have one last good meal at the canyon before setting out at dawn. He vanished for an hour and came back with a pair of rabbits, which he skillfully prepared while Catherine gathered wild onions and herbs as he had shown her. "This is absolutely delicious," Catherine said as they ate the stew he had made. "I never would have guessed I'd enjoy cooking over a campfire more than a fancy dinner, but it just tastes better out here." "Hunger makes the best ways and seasoning," Adam said with a small smile. "But it's also true that food tastes better when you had a hand in getting it." "I suppose it does," Catherine agreed, thinking about how good it felt to find the wild onions and know which plants were good to eat, just like Adam had taught her. As the sun started to dip low, painting the canyon walls in hues of gold and deep red, a comfortable quiet settled between them. Catherine realized with a sharp pang that this was their last night in this little sheltered canyon that had started to feel like a strange sort of home. Tomorrow they would be in Rollins. She would meet her uncle, and Adam would go on about his life. "Will you be staying in Rollins for long?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. Adam shook his head. "Just long enough to deliver these horses and get my supplies. Then it's back to the ranch for me. Got livestock to see to." "Of course," Catherine said, trying her best to hide the disappointment she felt. This ranch must be a heap of work." "It sure is," Adam said in agreement, "especially since I'm trying to grow the breeding program. I've got my sights on a thoroughbred stallion that could really improve my whole line." "You have a real passion for what you do," Catherine pointed out. Adam gave a slow nod, his face softening just a little. "I never figured I'd find any peace after the war. But working with horses, that gave it to me. They don't pass judgment. They don't carry a grudge. They just react to how you treat them." He nudged the fire with a branch. "A whole lot simpler than folks." "Is that the reason you live all by yourself?" Catherine asked, and then wished she could take back the personal question right away. "I am so sorry. That is none of my concern." But Adam did not seem to be bothered. "That is part of it," he confessed. "And the other part is that the right woman just has not shown up yet. Out here, the chances to meet decent women are few and far between." He cut his eyes over at her, then looked away real quick. "What about your situation? No fella waiting for you back in Boston?" Catherine just shook her head. "There were some gentlemen who showed they were interested, but after my parents passed away and my situation changed, well, their interest faded rather quickly." "Fools," Adam said, his voice quiet but firm. Catherine looked up, startled. "What did you say?" "Any man who judges a woman's worth by her fortune or her family name is a fool," Adam explained, his blue eyes locking with hers for the first time that whole evening. Catherine felt a blush creep up her neck at the intensity of his stare. That is a refreshing point of view," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It is just common sense," Adam replied with a shrug. But his eyes stayed on hers for a long moment before he turned back to the fire. The rest of the evening was spent in quiet talk and getting ready for the journey ahead. When it was time to turn in for the night, Catherine found she was unwilling to let their last evening together end. "Adam," she said as he covered the fire with dirt, "I want to thank you again for saving my life. I do not know how I could ever repay your kindness." Adam straightened up, his face serious in the dim glow of the dying embers. "There is no debt between us," he said firmly. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Catherine disagreed. "Not everyone would have. Not everyone would have taken the time to teach me, to help me understand this land. You have given me back more than just my life. You have given me the skills to survive out here." Adam seemed uneasy with her praise. "Get some rest," he said in a gruff voice. "We have an early start tomorrow." Catherine nodded, understanding he was not one for accepting thanks. "Good night, then." "Good night, Catherine," Adam replied, and the way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth all through her. As she lay in her tent, listening to the sounds of the wilderness at night, Catherine finally faced the truth she had been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with Adam Zane. The thought was both wonderful and frightening. He was everything she never knew she wanted in a man, rough around the edges, quiet, and more comfortable in the wild than in any city. But in the short time she had known him, He had shown her more real kindness and respect than any of those fancy gentlemen back in Boston ever had. Tomorrow, though, they would get to Rollins, and their trails would surely part. Adam had his ranch, his horses, and a quiet life that seemed to suit him just fine. What room could there be in a life like that for a city woman who was only just learning the ways of this new country? With those heavy thoughts circling in her mind, Catherine finally fell into a restless sleep. The morning came crisp and cool, with a light fog resting low in the canyon as Adam and Catherine got ready to leave. They moved well together, loading the pack horses and getting their own mounts saddled up. When they were all set, Adam turned to Catherine. "Let me check on your feet one last time," he said. "It is going to be a long ride, and I sure don't want those cuts opening back up." Catherine sat down on a boulder and held out her feet. Adam knelt down, carefully taking off the bandages to look at the healing wounds. His touch was as gentle as always, but now Catherine felt every bit of it, her skin tingling right where his fingers brushed against her. "They are looking good," Adam said, spreading one last layer of salve on them before wrapping them up again. "The boots should keep them safe, but you let me know if they start to hurt you too much." "I will," Catherine promised. Adam gave her a hand up onto Daisy, and he adjusted the stirrups so they were just the right length. His hands lingered on her ankle for just a moment as he checked to make sure everything was right. "Now you remember what I showed you," he said. "Sit down deep in that saddle, with your heels pointed down. Use your knees to hold on, not your hands." Catherine nodded and took hold of the reins, just like he taught her. "I am ready." Adam swung up onto his bay gelding in one smooth move that showed he had spent a lifetime on horseback. He took one last look around the canyon that had been their shelter. Then he led the way out onto the trail, with Catherine riding right behind him. The day got warm in a hurry as they rode, with the sun climbing high into a sky that was clear and blue. Adam kept them at a good steady pace, nothing too hard for Catherine's feet, which were still on the mend. They rode a twisting trail that took them through rocky hills and then across wide-open plains. Every now and then, Adam would point something out, like a landmark or the sign of an animal. "Elk tracks," he said, pointing to some marks in the dirt next to a little stream where they had stopped to let the horses drink. "They are fresh, probably from early this morning." Catherine leaned over to look at the prints, amazed by this hidden world that Adam could read like a book. "How can you tell they are from an elk and not a deer?" "Size, mostly," Adam answered, squatting down to show her the details. "Elk are bigger, so they leave a deeper print. See the shape of it right here? Deer tracks are a little more pointed at the toe." Catherine nodded, tucking that new piece of information away. It seemed like every hour she spent with Adam, she learned something new about the wilderness. Some little skill that made her feel less like a stranger in this big, open land. They stopped for a quick bite to eat around noon, sharing some jerky and hardtack biscuits in the shade of a big cottonwood tree that stood all by itself. Catherine's muscles were aching from so many hours in the saddle, but she was not about to complain. "How are your feet holding up?" Adam asked her while they were resting. "A little bit sore, but they are not bleeding," Catherine told him. "I will be just fine." Adam looked at her face for a long moment, like he was trying to see if she was hiding how much she really hurt. "We can slow down if you need to." "There is no need for that," Catherine said, her voice firm. "I want to make it to Rollins today." Adam just nodded, but for a split second, she saw something in his eyes. Maybe it was disappointment, but it was gone so fast that Catherine figured she must have imagined it. They got back on their horses and kept riding, and the land around them started to change as they got closer to Rollins. The wild, empty country started to show signs of people, like a faraway ranch house, a line of telegraph poles, and the ruts in the dirt that showed it was a road people used often. By late in the afternoon, they came over a hill and saw Rollins laid out down below them. It was a dusty little frontier town with wooden buildings all bunched up along a main street and a few houses and corrals scattered around the edges. Smoke was curling up from the chimneys, and even from that far away they could see that it was a busy little place. Catherine felt a funny mix of relief and sadness as they rode closer to the town. She was relieved to finally be somewhere safe, to be close to meeting her uncle and starting her new life. But she was also sad that her time with Adam was about to end. Sad at the thought of him just riding off to his ranch and right out of her life for good. "Well, there it is," Adam said, pulling his horse up next to hers, though she could already see it plain as day. Rollins, not much to look at after living in Boston, I reckon. It looks wonderful to me, Catherine said, and she meant it. After all those days out in the wild, the sight of buildings and people was a welcome one, even if the town was just a speck compared to Boston. They rode down the hill and onto the rutted road that led into Rollins. As they got into the town itself, Catherine could feel people staring at them. A lady riding next to a dusty cowboy wearing a dress that was all torn and dirty was clearly not something you saw every day. Adam led them to a two-story wooden building with a sign that said Anderson's Mercantile. He swung down from his horse and then helped Catherine down, his hands feeling strong and sure at her waist. "This is your uncle's place," he said, nodding toward the store. "The end of the line for us." Catherine just nodded because all of a sudden it was hard to find her voice. This was the moment she had been dreading all day long, the moment they would have to part ways. Before she could figure out what to say, the door to the Mercantile flew open and a heavy-set man with a beard and an apron came rushing out. "Catherine, Catherine Anderson, is that really you?" "Uncle Thomas?" Catherine said, stepping forward. She could see her own father's face in the older man's. "Thank the good Lord," Thomas boomed, pulling her into a bear hug that lifted her right off the ground. "We have been worried sick about you. We heard about the stagecoach attack 3 days ago. I have had search parties out looking for you ever since." As he set her back down, Thomas finally noticed Adam standing there quietly with the horses. "Zane, did you find her?" Adam nodded. "Out on the flats, west of here. She had been walking for days on end." Thomas turned back to Catherine, and his face was a picture of horror. "Walking all that way?" "Her feet were bleeding pretty bad from the journey," Adam said in a quiet voice. "They are healing up now, but she will need to stay off of them for a few more days at least." Thomas just shook his head, amazed, and then he stuck his hand out to Adam. "I cannot thank you enough, Zane. You saved my niece's life." Adam shook his hand for a second. "She is a whole lot tougher than she looks. She might have made it on her own." "Nonsense," Thomas said. "Nobody makes it out there alone without knowing the country." He looked back and forth between Adam and Catherine, and you could tell he saw something in the way they looked at each other. "But come on inside, both of you. You must be worn out." "Martha," he hollered over his shoulder, "put on a fresh pot of coffee and set 2 more places for supper. Catherine is here," and she brought Adam Zane with her. Before either of them could say a word, Thomas was guiding them into the Mercantile, which smelled nice, like coffee and tobacco, and new leather. A round, friendly-looking woman, who must have been Martha, came out from a back room. She gasped when she saw Catherine's condition and immediately took her upstairs to get cleaned up and find some fresh clothes. About an hour later, Catherine came back down the stairs. She was wearing a dress of Martha's that they had quickly pinned to fit her better. She had taken a bath, her hair was brushed and tidy, and she almost felt like her old self again. The only things that were different were the soreness in her feet and a strange, empty feeling in her heart when she thought about saying goodbye to Adam. She found Adam, Thomas, and Martha all sitting at a big table in the back room of the store. A wonderful hot meal was spread out in front of them. Adam had clearly cleaned himself up too. His dark hair was still a little damp, and his face was clean-shaven for the first time since she had met him. Without all the trail dust and stubble, he looked younger, but just as rugged as before. He stood up when she walked in, a simple act of politeness that warmed Catherine's heart. "You look all put back together," he said simply. "I feel much better," Catherine answered, taking the chair that Martha pointed to, "although my feet still complain a little bit when I put my weight on them." "You should stay off of them completely," Adam advised, "for at least another day or 2. "Dr. Reynolds can come have a look at them tomorrow," Thomas said, "just to make sure no infection is setting in." The meal was the best thing Catherine had eaten in months. There was roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh baked bread, and vegetables right from Martha's own garden. The conversation was easy, with Thomas doing most of the talking. He told Catherine all about the town, his business, and the plans he had made for her. "You will stay with us, of course," Thomas said. "We have a spare room upstairs that Martha has fixed up real nice for you. And when you are feeling up to it, I was hoping you might be able to help out in the store. We could surely use someone with a good head for numbers and a nice way with the customers." "I would be happy to help," Catherine said, and she truly meant it. "I want to earn my support." "That's just silly," Thomas boomed. "You are family. But if you have your heart set on working, there is more than enough to do. This town is bursting at the seams, and the Mercantile can hardly keep up." All through dinner, Catherine felt the weight of Adam's presence from across the table. He said very little, only giving short answers to Thomas's questions about his horses and the ranch, seeming perfectly happy to just listen. Every so often, Catherine would look up and find him watching her, and she could not get a read on him, no matter how she tried. When the meal was over, Adam slid his chair back. "I should be on my way," he said. "I need to look in on the horses at the livery, and I have got business at the land office first thing in the morning." "You are welcome to stay the night," Thomas offered. "We have plenty of room." Adam shook his head. "I appreciate that, but I have already got a room at the hotel." He looked over at Catherine, his tough expression softening just a little. "You mind those feet now. Do not go pushing the healing." Catherine nodded, fighting a sudden, strange urge to cry. "I will, and thank you again for everything." Adam just touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said to Martha, "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for the supper." And just like that, he was gone, the little bell over the mercantile door ringing as he left. Thomas gave Catherine a curious look. "He is quite a fella, that Adam Zane. One of the only men I would trust my life with out in that rough country. You were lucky he was the one who found you." "Yes," Catherine agreed, her voice barely a whisper. "I was very lucky indeed." That night, tucked into the comfortable bed in her uncle's guest room, Catherine just could not find sleep. She could not get Adam off her mind, recalling the warmth of his hands as he cared for her wounds, the rare smile that completely changed his serious face, and the quiet confidence he had while navigating the wild country. She thought about their talks by the campfire, the small windows he had opened for her into his life and his way of thinking. "I might never lay eyes on him again," she realized with a sharp ache. "He will deliver his horses, finish his business, and head right back to his ranch. Our trails crossed just by luck, and now they are bound to split again." The thought left her, feeling hollowed out inside in a way she never would have expected. The morning sun did not do a thing to chase away those heavy thoughts. Catherine did as Adam told her and stayed off her feet, letting Martha fuss over her and bring her meals on a tray. Doc Reynolds came by, took a look at her feet, and declared Adam's handiwork was mighty impressive for an old cowboy fix, saying she should keep resting them for another day at least. By her second day in Rollins, Catherine was getting plumb stir-crazy. She talked Thomas into helping her downstairs to a chair behind the counter. There, she could at least watch the life of the store, feel a little useful handling the ledger, and help folks with small items that did not require her to get up. Every time that little bell over the door sang out, her head would shoot up, hoping it was Adam. But while plenty of townspeople dropped in to meet Thomas's niece from Boston and welcome her to Rollins, Adam never showed. "Has Mr. Zane finished his business in town yet?" Catherine tried to sound casual when she asked Thomas on the third day as they were locking up the store. Thomas shook his head. "Do not believe so. I saw him at the land office yesterday, and he said something about waiting on some papers. He will probably be in town another day or two." He shot Catherine a knowing glance. "Looked like you two got on pretty good out there on the trail." Catherine felt her face grow warm. "He was very good to me, very patient while he taught me about surviving out here." "Now, Zane is not exactly known for his patience," Thomas remarked, "or for sticking his nose in other folks' affairs. The fact that he not only got you to safety, but took the time to care for you and teach you things, well, that is not his usual way at all." Catherine was not sure what to make of that, so she just stayed quiet, making herself busy by straightening a display of colorful ribbons. "He is a good man," Thomas went on, not seeming to notice her discomfort. "He mostly keeps to himself, but he is honest in his dealings and as dependable as the sunrise. Some people think he is standoffish, but I have always figured he just prefers the company of his horses over most folks." "He told me he lost his brother in the war," Catherine said quietly. "I think he has probably known more loss than most people." Thomas nodded, his face serious. "That he has. Lost his folks when he was young, then his brother, then he came out west with nothing but his horse and the shirt on his back. He built that ranch of his from the ground up. A man like that, he learns to rely on himself, maybe a little too much sometimes." Catherine took this all in, adding it to the picture of Adam she was building in her mind. He was a solitary man, shaped by hardship and war, who found his peace in the wild country with his animals instead of with people. Later that evening, Catherine was sitting on the small porch behind the mercantile, enjoying the cool air as the sunset painted the mountains in the distance. Suddenly, she heard the old gate groan open. Looking up, she was startled to see Adam walking toward her, his tall figure a shadow against the beautiful golden sky. Adam, she said, getting up too fast and wincing at the protest from her feet. My keep, she protested. You ought to be resting those feet, he said as he walked over, putting a hand on her elbow to steady her. I've been resting them for days, Catherine answered. I am about to go stir-crazy if I do not move around some. A small smile appeared on Adam's face. Stubborn, he noted. That will serve you well out here. A bit of an awkward silence fell between them. Now that they were back around other people, they both seemed a little unsure of how to act. The closeness they had shared out in the wilderness that felt like it had been just a dream. How is your business coming along? Catherine finally asked, motioning for Adam to take the chair next to hers. Almost done, Adam replied as he sat down. The army took the horses. I'm just waiting on some paperwork from the land office. Then I will be heading back to my ranch. Tomorrow? Catherine asked, and she could not hide the disappointment in her voice. Adam nodded. If all goes according to plan. Another silence settled between them, but this one felt heavier than the last one. Catherine looked out at the street, not knowing what to say. Out at the sunset, working up the nerve for what she needed to say. I have been thinking a lot about our time on the trail, she began. So have I, Adam admitted, his voice low. Catherine turned to face him, surprised he would say such a thing. You have? Adam's blue eyes met hers without wavering. I am not a man who uses a lot of words, Catherine. I never have been. But I keep thinking of things I want to tell you, things I wish I had said before we made it to town. Catherine's heart started to pound in her chest. What sort of things? Adam looked down at his own hands, which were work-roughened and strong. I have been on my own for a long time. I got used to being alone. I even thought I preferred it that way. He paused, choosing his next words with care. But those days we spent in the canyon with you, they showed me something different, something I did not even realize I was missing. Catherine held her breath, scared that if she moved, she might break the spell of this surprising confession. I know you have a life planned here, Adam went on, with your uncle, the store, a place in town, and I have the ranch, my horses. Our trails just do not run together, not naturally. They crossed once, Catherine said softly, by luck or by fate or whatever you care to call it. Adam looked up, his eyes meeting hers again. Yes, they did. He took a deep breath. I am not offering you much. It is a hard life on a ranch way out there. Long days full of work, tough winters, none of the comforts or company you are used to. Catherine's heart felt like it could fly as she understood what he was trying to say in his own awkward way. Adam, are you asking me to come with you? She asked, plain and simple, leaving no room for doubt. The look on Adam's face was more vulnerable than she had ever seen. I am asking if you might be willing to visit the ranch, to see if it is a life you could see yourself in. I do not expect you to. Catherine did not let him finish his sentence. Forgetting all about the pain in her feet, she leaned over and put her hand on top of his. Yes, she said, as simple as that. Adam looked shocked. Yes? Yes. I would love to visit your ranch, Catherine said, a smile finally breaking through. And yes, I think it might just be a life I could imagine sharing with you. The change that came over Adam's face right then was something Catherine knew she would carry with her forever. The usual guard he kept up just melted away, showing a depth of feeling that simply stole her breath. His hand turned under hers and their fingers laced together. I am not good with words, Adam said once more. But I reckon I might be falling in love with you, Catherine Anderson. Well now, Catherine answered, a wide smile spreading across her face. Seeing as how you carried me when my feet were torn up, nursed me back, and taught me how to stay alive in this country, I figure it is only right to tell you that I am pretty dang sure I am falling in love with you too, Adam Zane. Adam's other hand came up and cupped her cheek, his touch as gentle as a whisper. I do not want to rush you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is all happening so fast. Life out in this part of the country does not pay much mind to proper courting schedules, Catherine said, throwing his own words about the wilderness back at him. You learn to change your expectations. Adam let out a low, warm laugh, a sound Catherine had never heard from him before. Using my own words right back at me, he said, shaking his head like he was mighty disappointed. You are going to be a handful, are you not? Without a doubt, Catherine agreed with a smile. But I reckon you might just like it. Adam's face turned serious once more. I want to go about this the proper way, he said. I want to have your uncle's blessing. I want to court you like a gentleman, even if it is not the Boston way. I would not expect anything less from you, Catherine said, moved by how he cared for doing things right, despite how clear his feelings were for her. The sound of the back door creaking open broke the moment, and they stepped apart just as Thomas came out onto the porch. Well, howdy, Adam, Thomas called out. Did not know you were stopping by. Came to see how my niece is mending, have you? Actually, sir, Adam said, getting to his feet and squaring his shoulders in a way that made Catherine think of a soldier about to be inspected. I came here to ask for your permission to formally call on Catherine. Thomas's eyebrows just about shot off his forehead, and he looked from one to the other with a new understanding. A slow grin spread over his face. Well, I will be, he said. I cannot say I am completely shocked. I saw the way you two were looking at each other during supper. He faced Catherine. Is this what you want, girl? Adam is a good man, but life on his ranch would be a whole world away from Boston society. It is precisely what I want, Uncle Thomas, Catherine stated with no hesitation. I have seen enough of this wild country to know its dangers, but I have also seen its beauty and its freedom. And I have seen enough of Adam to know he is a man I could make a life with, no matter where that might be. Thomas nodded, looking pleased. Well then, Adam, you have got my blessing, though I was kind of hoping to have Catherine's help around the store for more than a few days. I am not planning on stealing her away just yet, Adam said with a surprising touch of humor. I was thinking a proper courtship should come first. Catherine has mentioned she would be interested in visiting the ranch, to see if it is a life she could get used to. That is a smart play, Thomas said with a nod. And that will give Martha some time to teach her a few things about housekeeping on the frontier. Ladies from Boston are not usually ready for ranch life. He gave Catherine a wink so she would not take his words too hard. I am a quick learner, Catherine told him, and I am ready to learn. That she is, Adam agreed, his eyes full of warmth as they met hers. She took to shooting and riding faster than anyone I have ever taught. Shooting? Thomas exclaimed, looking at his quiet niece with a whole new level of respect. Well, I will be. Martha will be scandalized. But I say good for you, girl. A woman out here ought to know how to handle a firearm. The talk went on, and had plans started coming together for Catherine to spend time learning from Martha while Adam took care of a few things he needed to do at his ranch. Then in a couple of weeks, once Catherine's feet were fully healed and she had learned some of the basics, Adam would come back to take her to his ranch for a visit. As the evening wound down and Adam got ready to head out, he took Catherine's hand in his. He promised, "You try to stay out of any trouble while I am gone." Catherine smiled up at him, her heart feeling full. I will do my very best, but I am not making any promises. Adam's face softened, and while Thomas made a point of looking somewhere else, he leaned down and touched his lips to Catherine's in a quick, sweet kiss. Until then, he said softly. As Catherine watched him go, his tall shape fading into the growing darkness, she could not help but think about the strange path her life had taken. A month ago, she had been a prim and proper Boston lady, grieving her aunt and not knowing what her future held. Now she was on the edge of a new life, one that would surely be full of challenges and hard times, but also full of love and new beginnings. She touched her lips, which were still tingling from Adam's kiss, and smiled. Her feet were no longer bleeding, but her true journey was only just getting started. The 3 weeks of waiting went by both in a flash and as slow as molasses for Catherine. True to his word, Thomas had Martha take Catherine under her wing, showing her all the important skills for keeping a home on the frontier, like how to cook on a wood stove, how to preserve meat and vegetables, how to make soap and candles, how to mend clothes, and a dozen other chores Catherine never dreamed would be a part of her world. To her own surprise, Catherine actually liked most of these lessons. There was a good feeling that came from making something useful with her own two hands, whether it was a fresh loaf of bread or a patched-up shirt. And Martha, who at first was not so sure about the city girl's ability to change, turned out to be a kind and encouraging teacher. "You have got a real knack for this bread," Martha announced one morning, looking over Catherine's latest attempt. "It is light and perfectly risen. Adam is a lucky man. There is nothing like good bread to keep a husband content." Catherine blushed at the idea that them getting married was already a sure thing, though deep in her heart, she had already made up her mind. Her time with Adam out on the trail, as short as it was, had shown her a kind of feeling she had never known before. Every day she spent away from him just made her more certain that her future was with him on his quiet ranch out in the Wyoming wilderness. In the evenings, Catherine would help Thomas at the mercantile, learning the trade and getting to know the folks in the town of Rollins. Most of them welcomed her with open arms, curious about the lady from Boston who had survived a stagecoach holdup and days all alone in the wild. "I heard tell Adam found you nearly half dead out on the flats," said Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, while she picked out some fabric for a new dress. "You are a lucky one. Most city folks would not last a single day out there." "I was very lucky indeed," Catherine agreed, as she measured the calico the woman had picked out. "And now I hear he is courting you," Mrs. Patterson went on, clearly enjoying this piece of gossip. "I never thought I would see the day. Adam has kept to himself ever since he moved to these parts. He is polite enough when he has business in town, but he was never one for socializing." Catherine gave a polite but non-committal smile, not wanting to talk about her relationship with Adam just to entertain the town gossips. But privately, she held on to the fact that Adam's interest in her was seen as something special by the people who knew him. By the time the 3 weeks were almost over, Catherine felt more ready for ranch life than she ever would have believed. Her feet had healed up completely, leaving behind only faint scars to remind her of what she had been through. She had gotten the hang of the basics of cooking, cleaning, and mending, and she kept practicing her riding on a gentle mare that Thomas had borrowed from a neighbor. The night before Adam was supposed to come back, Catherine sat on the porch with Thomas, watching the stars pop out in the clear Wyoming sky. "You are sure about this, girl?" Thomas asked, his voice soft. "It is not too late to change your mind. You could stay right here in Rollins, help me with the store. We would be mighty glad to have you." Catherine turned to her uncle, thankful for his concern. "I am sure," she told him firmly. "I know it is not going to be easy. I know there will be tough times and struggles I cannot even begin to imagine yet." But she looked up at the stars, trying to find the right words for how she felt. "When I am with Adam, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Does that make any sense?" Thomas nodded and patted her hand. "It does. That is how I felt with your Aunt Martha before she passed on. Like I had found my spot in the world." He let out a sigh. "I just want you to be happy, Catherine. You have had more than your share of sadness in your young life." "Adam makes me happy," Catherine said, plain and simple. "And I hope I make him happy too." "The way that man looks at you," Thomas chuckled. "There is no question about that. I have never seen Adam so full of life as when he is talking to you or about you." Catherine smiled, feeling warm inside from this news about Adam's feelings. "Thank you for understanding, Uncle Thomas. And for everything you have done to help me get ready." "Just doing what family does," Thomas answered in a gruff voice. "And speaking of family, you tell Adam I expect the both of you back here for Christmas no matter what. Martha will have my hide if she does not get to fuss over you at least once a year. I promise," Catherine said, leaning in to give his weathered cheek a kiss. The next morning came up clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Catherine was awake before the sun, too worked up to sleep. She got dressed with care in one of the sensible outfits Martha had helped her make, a split riding skirt and a sturdy blouse that would let her ride astride without any trouble. By mid-morning, Catherine was starting to feel a little on edge. Adam had said he would be there early, but there was still no sign of him. She tried to keep herself occupied, helping Martha with the baking and Thomas with taking inventory, but her gaze kept wandering to the window. It was getting close to noon when the little bell over the mercantile door jingled, and Catherine looked up to see Adam standing right there, covered in trail dust, but with a smile in his eyes the moment they met hers. "You are late," she said, not able to keep. Joy rang in her voice as she hurried across the store to meet him. "A wagon axle snapped clean in two about 10 miles back," Adam explained. "I had to get that fixed before I could move on." His gaze moved over her, noticing the sensible clothes and the sure way she stood. Are you looking at a good different or a bad different? Catherine asked, a little shy all of a sudden. Good, Adam said with no hesitation at all. Real good, like you belong out here now. That might have been the finest thing he could have said to her, and Catherine could feel a happy warmth spread right through her. I have been learning, she said. Martha has been a patient teacher. She is a fast learner, Martha called out from behind the counter. We might just make a true frontier woman out of her yet. Zane, Adam nodded, but his eyes never once left Catherine's face. I do not doubt that for a second. Mrs. Anderson. Thomas came out from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. Zane, it is about time you got here. Catherine has been staring out that window all morning long. Uncle Thomas, Catherine said, her face turning red. A little smile played on Adam's lips, a look she had grown to treasure. I am sorry to have kept you waiting, he said, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. It was a long 3 weeks, yes, Catherine whispered back. It surely was. They rode out of Rollins just after noon, after a tearful goodbye from Martha and a gruff warning from Thomas to take good care of our girl. Adam had brought a strong wagon and extra horses, telling her that they would need it for supplies and to make Catherine's trip a bit easier. I can ride a horse, Catherine told him as he helped her onto the wagon seat. I have been practicing. I am sure you have, Adam answered, letting his hand rest on hers for a moment. But it is a far piece to the ranch, and this will be kinder to your feet. It warmed Catherine's heart that he was still thinking about her comfort, still remembering her feet were healing. As the wagon pulled away from Rollins, Catherine felt a quick little stab of worry. She was leaving the very last bits of town life behind her, giving herself over to a life in the wild with a man she had known for less than a single month. By the rules of Boston society, what she was doing would be seen as a scandal, a reckless move that could lead to ruin. But when she looked over at Adam sitting beside her, his strong and steady profile set against the wide-open plains, Catherine knew deep down that she was making the right choice. This man and this land, they spoke to something inside of her, a part of her that had maybe always been there, just waiting to be woken up. They traveled for 3 days, making camp under a blanket of stars each night. Adam was a thoughtful partner, always looking out for Catherine's comfort, but never hovering over her. He let her take the wagon reins for long stretches of the trip, nodding his approval when she showed how much her driving had improved. In the evenings, they would sit by the campfire and talk late into the night. Adam talked more than he ever had. On their first trip together, telling Catherine all about his plans for the ranch, the horses he raised and trained, and the land that he had grown to love. Catherine, for her part, told him more about her life in Boston, her dreams and her worries, and her hopes for the life they would build together. On the morning of the 4th day, Adam pulled the horses to a stop at the top of a ridge. Well, there it is, he said, pointing down into the valley below. Home. Catherine leaned forward, eager to see it all. A small but solid-looking cabin stood next to a sparkling stream, with smoke curling up from its stone chimney. A barn and corral stood nearby, holding several horses whose coats shined in the morning light. Fields of hay stretched out to the east, and to the west, pine-covered hills climbed up toward mountains in the distance. It was a beautiful place, wild and far from everything, for sure, but it felt settled, cared for. It said a lot about the man who had built it all. Oh, Adam, Catherine said softly, it is wonderful. The relief that washed over Adam's face was easy to see. You really think so? It is not. Much, especially compared to Boston. I know that. It is perfect, Catherine said with a firm voice. Absolutely perfect. As they made their way down into the valley, a man came out of the cabin. He looked to be in his 60s, weathered by the sun, with a full white beard and a slight limp. He lifted a hand to wave as they got closer. That is Josiah, Adam explained. He helps me out around here when I have to be away. He is an old trapper who lost his leg to the frost years ago. A good man. Josiah helped them unload the wagon, and his kind eyes twinkled when Adam introduced him to Catherine. So you are the city girl who has turned our Adam's head, he said, giving her hand a firm shake. You must be some kind of woman to pull that off. I'm still learning my way around the West, Catherine answered, taking a liking to the old man right away. But I am anxious to make this place my home. You will do just fine, Josiah declared after looking her over for a moment. You have got a good head on your shoulders, I can tell, and a strong heart to go with it, from what Adam tells me of your adventures. Once the wagon was unloaded and the horses were cared for, Josiah said his goodbyes. He rode off to his own little cabin a few miles away, promising to come back and check on them regular-like. Adam showed Catherine all around the ranch, his voice full of pride as he pointed out the things he had built over the years. He showed her the irrigation ditch that brought water from the stream to the hayfields. He talked about the breeding program that was turning out horses wanted by the Army and by folks all over the territory. He showed her the root cellar that kept their vegetables fresh all through the winter. The cabin itself was simple but built to last, with 2 rooms. There was a main living area that served as a kitchen and sitting room and a small bedroom. Adam had clearly worked hard to get it ready for Catherine. Fresh curtains were hanging in the windows, a bright quilt was spread on the bed, and he had put up shelves to hold the books and things she had brought with her from Rollins. "It is not much," Adam said again, watching her face with a worried look as she looked around the cabin. "But we can build on, add more rooms, whenever we need to." "It is perfect," Catherine said again, turning to look right at him. "Truly, Adam, I could not ask for a more beautiful home." You could see the worry just melt right off his shoulders. "I just want you to be happy here," he said, his voice simple and true. Catherine walked over to him and put her hands on his chest. "I am happy because I am with you," Adam's arms wrapped around her, pulling her in close. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice thick with feeling, "I never thought I would find someone who would choose this kind of life, who would choose me. I still can hardly believe you are really here." "You had better believe it," Catherine whispered back, rising up on her toes to press her lips against his. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." The kiss grew deeper, saying all the things that words could not. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, their faces flushed. "I should," Adam started, and then he cleared his throat. "There are still proper ways to do things, even way out here. I will sleep in the barn until we are married." Catherine felt a wave of affection washed over her for this man, so mindful of her good name, even when they were miles from the closest soul. "When do you reckon that will be?" she asked. "The wedding, I mean. Soon as we can manage it," Adam said, his voice full of warmth. "The traveling preacher makes his rounds every 6 weeks or so. He is due back in about 3 weeks' time." "If that is all right with you, that is more than all right with me," Catherine promised him. The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of chores as Catherine learned the rhythm of the ranch. Every day brought a new test and a new sense of accomplishment as she used the skills Martha had taught her, while picking up new ones that came with ranching. Adam was patient as a saint and stood by her, never once making her feel foolish when she fumbled a task, and always quick with a kind word when she finally got the hang of something new. They settled into a comfortable routine of working together and resting together, laying the groundwork for the life they were about to build, one day at a time. True to what he said, Adam made his bed in the barn, though he ate his meals with Catherine in the cabin and spent his evenings with her, talking about what was to come. They planned to build onto the cabin come winter, adding a real kitchen and another bedroom. Come spring, they would plant more hayfields and maybe put in a little vegetable patch. The horse breeding was already looking good, with a few fellows showing real interest in Adam's stock. "I never figured I would have all this," Adam admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the mountains in colors of gold and deep purple. "The ranch? Sure, I worked for it, planned on it, but I never planned on having someone to share it with. Not a life that had a family in it." "Do you hope for children?" Catherine asked, finally saying the question that had been sitting on her heart. Adam was quiet for a good long while, then he gave a slow nod. "I believe I do, with you, if that is something you would want as well." "I do," Catherine said, her voice soft, more than anything. Adam reached for her hand, his thumb gently making circles on her palm. They could have a good life here. Plenty of room to run free, clean air in their lungs. We would teach them to care for the land, to be strong and to count on themselves, but to also be kind and fair. The picture he painted filled Catherine with a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening sun. They would have the best father in the world, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. Adam's eyes, when they met hers, had a tender look in them that still took her by surprise. "I sure hope so," he said simply. The circuit preacher, a man named Reverend Johnson, showed up exactly 3 weeks after Catherine had arrived at the ranch. Word had gotten around about the wedding, and on the day it was set to happen, neighbors from miles in every direction came to the ranch to see them get married and to celebrate with them afterward. Catherine wore a simple dress the color of a pale blue sky, one that Martha had helped her make back in Rollins. She had her hair up in a crown of braids, decorated with wildflowers that Adam had gone out and picked for her that morning. As she stood there next to him in front of the preacher, Catherine felt a sense of rightness so deep that it washed away all the doubts and fears that had come with her on her journey out west. "Do you, Adam Zane, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Johnson asked in his deep voice. "I do," Adam answered, his own voice steady as a rock. "And do you, Catherine Anderson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Catherine said, her heart feeling so full she thought it might just pop. "Then, by the power given to me, I now declare you husband and wife. You may go on and kiss your bride." Adam's kiss was tender and respectful, a sweet promise of all the days and nights they had ahead of them. As they turned to look at their neighbors, who were now their friends, Catherine saw Thomas and Martha in the crowd of folks wishing them well. Her uncle had tears in his eyes, and Martha was just beaming with pride. The party went on late into the evening, with plenty of food, music, and dancing right there under the stars. After the last person had either gone home or found a place to sleep in the barn or in a tent nearby, Adam took Catherine back to the cabin. Their cabin, their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zane," he said, scooping her up into his arms to carry her right over the threshold. "I have been home since the very first day you found me," Catherine answered, wrapping her arms tight around his neck. "My feet were all torn up from walking so far. And you carried me the whole rest of the way, not just with your arms, but to a brand new life, a fresh start." Adam's eyes got dark with feeling as he gently set her down in the heart of their home. "I will carry you anywhere you ever need to go," he vowed, his voice a little rough. "For the rest of our lives," Catherine stood on her toes and pressed her lips right to his. "And I will walk right beside you," she whispered against his mouth, "every single step of the way." Epilogue 5 years later. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." A 4-year-old Thomas Zane came running across the yard, his dark hair flying every which way, holding something small in his grubby little hand. Trailing behind him was 2-year-old Elizabeth, doing her best to keep up with her big brother. Catherine looked up from her garden patch, where she was picking the last of the summer vegetables, and shielded her eyes from the sun. "What you got there, sweet boy?" Thomas slid to a halt right next to her and opened his fist, showing her a perfectly shaped arrowhead. "Uncle Josiah says it is real old, from the Indians who were here a long time ago." "It is just beautiful," Catherine said, turning the old stone over in her fingers. "We ought to put it up on the shelf with the others." Adam walked up from the corral where he had been working with a brand new colt. He lifted Elizabeth up into his arms when she reached for him, which made his little girl giggle with pure joy. "What is all this commotion about?" he asked, giving Thomas's hair a playful tussle with his free hand. Thomas showed off his treasure with pride, and Adam nodded like he was mighty impressed. "Good eye there, son. That is a mighty fine piece." Catherine just watched her husband and her children, and her heart felt like it would overflow with love for this little family they had made together. The last 5 years had their share of troubles, that was for sure. They had seen bitter winters, a hard time when their first child was born, and the one year the drought nearly ruined their whole hay crop. But they had stood together through it all and came out even stronger on the other side. The ranch had done well under their care. The cabin was now a real house with 4 whole rooms and a covered porch that went around 2 sides. The horse breeding business had earned a good name all over the territory, with folks coming from as far off as California just to buy one of Adam's horses. Catherine had even started a small school in one of the spare buildings, teaching not just Thomas and Elizabeth, but also the children from the neighboring ranches, who would ride over 3 days a week for their lessons. This was not the life Catherine had ever pictured for herself when she was growing up back in Boston, but it was so much richer and more satisfying than anything she could have ever dreamed up. Right here, on this stretch of wild Wyoming land, she had found what she was meant to do, her joy, her home. Adam came and stood next to her, still holding Elizabeth, with Thomas leaning up against his leg. "What is on your mind?" he asked, seeing the thoughtful look on her face. Catherine smiled up at him, at this man whose quiet strength and steady love had become the very center of her whole world. I was just thinking how lucky I am, she told him. How a single moment of pure terror led me to the biggest blessing of my entire life. Adam's free arm came around her waist, pulling her in close to his side. The day I found you was the luckiest day of my life, he said in a low voice, though I hate to even think about all you went through. Catherine rested her head on his strong shoulder. My feet healed up just fine, she reminded him, and you carried me the rest of the way to this life, this family, this love. And I always will, Adam promised, leaning down to kiss her on the temple. All around them, the ranch was peaceful in the late afternoon glow. The fields were ripe and ready for harvest. The horses were grazing easy in the pasture, and the mountains stood like silent watchmen on the edge of the sky. It was a hard life in a lot of ways, a life that asked for grit and toughness and endless work. But as Catherine stood there, surrounded by her family, she knew with all her heart that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her story had started with hurt feet and a soul full of fear, but it had brought her to a love and a life that was bigger than any dream she ever had. And that, Catherine thought to herself, as she turned to give her husband a proper kiss, which made their children giggle and groan, was worth every single painful step it took to get here.